Hello, everybody. Welcome to this VCCA session. We've called this session Implementation of AI into Clinical Practice, Some Global Perspectives. And we've called it Global Perspectives because, as you'll see, we have got people from all over the world. Now, the background to this session is that the three of us who have been involved in organizing it, so that's Laura Coco, Valerie Shapiro, and me, are from what was called the Internet and Audiology Group. And the Internet and Audiology Group hosted a series of conferences between 2014 and 2021 when sort of audiology and the internet were novel. At the end of the conference in 2021, we kind of stepped back and we thought, well, audiology and internet are now somewhat mainstream. So we don't need an individual conference dedicated to that because it pops up throughout everything else. So we now kind of pop up at different conferences and events like we're doing now. Being clinical group, we are audiology. So for VCCA, we wanted to look at aspects of implementing AI into clinical practice. And we're not necessarily focusing, or we don't particularly want to focus on this is what technology might be able to do, but more some of the facilitators that will help, some of the barriers, some of the concerns that people have. And what we've done is we've convened a group of people who have been thinking about the intersections between AI and clinical care, and they're going to share their thoughts and opinions on the matter. So we've got a panel of 4 people. We've got Beck Bennett from NAL in Australia. We've got Crystal Rolfe from the RNID, a UK charity. We've got Riley DeBacker from the National Center for Rehabilitative Auditory Research in Portland, in Oregon. And we've got Laura Coco from San Diego State University. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get each of them now to introduce themselves and share with us how AI is relevant to their work. And then we'll move on to discussion. So why don't we just go in that random order I had just now? So Beck, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Gabby. So hi, I'm Beck Bennett. I'm a clinical and research audiologist, principal audiologist at the National Acoustics Laboratories in Sydney, Australia. My research focuses on the social, emotional wellbeing impacts of hearing loss on clients, and also how clinicians can consider these needs in their clinical practice. So a lot of my research has focused on that kind of implementation part of research, so how we move from the research findings and put them into clinical practice, how we help clinicians adopt new approaches and technologies. And a couple of the projects I'm working on at the moment are developing digital health interventions, which include AI components. And so I've been reading a lot and thinking a lot about the role of AI in research, that it has a future of being implemented into that clinical space.
Brilliant, thank you. Crystal.
I had a sticky mute button. Oh, and now
your video is gone.
Bear with me a second. I think that my computer is not interested in this time of day.
It is 9:30 in the UK, so it's quite understandable. You're back.
So my name's Crystal Rolfe. I'm the Director of Strategy at the UK charity RNID, the Royal National Institute for Deaf People. And so my interest is really in what patients' perspectives are of the use of AI in audiology, and also clinicians, and how we can kind of change opinions and behaviours. So I don't pretend to be an AI expert in any way, but I'm really interested in how this kind of everyday piece of technology affects people who are deaf and have hearing loss, who are talking to RNID regularly about what their views are.
Cool, and that's exactly the kind of discussion we want today, so thank you. Riley.
So as Gabby mentioned, I work over at the NCRAR here in Portland, and my lab primarily looks at the impacts of medications on hearing, ototoxicity of both cancer and some other emerging ototoxicants that we're looking into. And that's sort of one of the ways that AI comes into my work. So We both are using AI right now to kind of try and recognize some novel medications that might be ototoxic that we just haven't researched yet. And then also to kind of use AI to help predict what people are at the greatest risk for hearing loss, what someone's hearing loss might look like after treatment, so that we can help to identify the people who need the closest monitoring or maybe treatment planning modifications, and then to identify changes over the course of treatment. So how can we use these sort of advanced statistical processes to refine how we can try and prevent and predict hearing loss in folks? And then there's a second avenue of my research that looks at how we can use generative AI models that create kind of like video chat assistants to help folks remotely troubleshoot hearing aids and other kind of experiences that come up on the day-to-day that might not require driving a long distance to go into a clinic or taking up a clinic slot, but would be able to be troubleshooted remotely, like replacing a wax guard that might be hard to remember your first time, but it'd be helpful if there was something to walk you through.
Brilliant. I think what's going to happen is the four of you are going to go away and all say, oh, I need to work with you in the future. Laura, why don't you introduce yourself?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, I feel grateful to be in the company of these folks. I'm an assistant professor at San Diego State University. My research focuses on improving access to hearing care, primarily for older adults in rural and underserved areas. San Diego is a border community, so I work with folks who speak Spanish, the primary language is Spanish, and also focus on how language and culture become barriers in access to care. And my interest in this group is I've worked with technology, hearing aids, telehealth, OTC hearing aids, and how usability or the fit between technology and people can become either a barrier or a facilitator to their access to care. So I've become really interested in AI in two areas. One, in improving access for patient care, and also with regards to students, because as a professor, I teach undergrads and grad students who are training to become clinicians. So I've been thinking a lot about how AI can help or can sometimes hurt that process.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. All right. So now I'm going to come up with some questions and I'll give you all a time to comment on each one. So we'll sort of get started with a very broad question, and then I think depending on your answers, we'll feed into some of the others. So first of all, what excites you most about AI for audiology, and but also on the converse, what makes you most nervous? So does anybody want to jump in, or I'll just point a finger? Beck.
I'm always happy to jump in. I think what excites me most about AI in audiology is from a clinician perspective and also as a researcher perspective, we can use these tools to be far more efficient. There are a lot of tools already available that I have adopted in my work that just save me a lot of time. And we recently ran a workshop at the Audiology Australia conference with 100 or so clinicians who came, and they learned about all these tools they can right now embed in their clinical flow, mostly administration time-saving type tools. But I think there also is a very near future where we're going to be able to use these AI tools to also improve our kind of diagnostic capabilities and the quality of the service and reach individuals who perhaps find it difficult to access our services, but it's just sort of the journey we take to get there. And there were two parts. You said what excites, and what was the second part of the question?
No, what are you most nervous about?
Am I nervous about? Look, I think at the moment I'm most nervous about the hype. So in sort of contrary to what I just said, there are some excellent tools that really can save time, but there are also a lot of AI-based tools being published and marketed out there that when you jump on and have a look, it actually isn't as amazing as the label says. And so sometimes there's a sort of a bit of fatigue in, oh, that sounds amazing. Oh, actually, it doesn't do what it says it does. It doesn't actually save me that much time. It's not that cool yet, or it doesn't actually solve that problem yet. And so I think because sort of the whole world is excited about AI, and there's all these, and it's great to see so many people starting small businesses and trying to develop AI type tools for that sort of administration side of things, but they don't always live up to expectations. And so I do worry that we might start to see fatigue around the term AI and AI-based tools. But there's also some worry that there will be some groups left behind, whether that's some of our clients with digital literacy barriers, or whether that's some clinicians who are too afraid to engage with some of these tools. We're going to see such a rapid evolution in this space that there will be a lot of people left behind and negatively impacted as well.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that later.
Yeah.
Who wants to step in next? Crystal.
I can go next. Yeah, so I really agree with everything that Bex just said. I think what excites me most is actually the thing that when we're talking to people who are deaf and have hearing loss, they've got most concern about, but it still excites me, which is about the ability to kind of early, kind of diagnose people early and triage them easily using kind of AI in future. But diagnosis is the thing that most concerns our communities when we're talking to them. So they're most comfortable with kind of AI being used in their treatments or their long-term care, and most concerned about diagnosis. And I think it's probably where clinicians' minds are too. And I think we probably just need to build up our own kind of trust and confidence in it being used in that way. But I'm still kind of really excited about what the potential is. In terms of concerns, I am concerned about kind of leaving behind groups who are more likely to experience health inequalities. But again, my real fear that I think is most likely is that we actually don't engage with it enough in audiology, and that we get left behind, and we can see when people are going to get treatment for other conditions that actually these AI tools are being used, and actually we are too slow to take them up in audiology, which therefore means that people aren't benefiting from the kind of full experience that they could. So because I think it's more likely that we end up being careful about supporting people who are more likely to experience health inequalities, because it's at the forefront, I think, of clinicians' minds, and more likely that we're not fast enough. So that's the kind of big watch out for in my mind.
Interesting. Laura, do you want to add anything?
No, we're going out of order.
Sorry, yeah, I realized that. Yeah, you moved on the screen, actually. I think that's what happened. Sorry, Riley.
Yes, I agree with what's said, and I'm also excited about the potential to improve access to care for folks to get information cheaper and faster than in models that they would traditionally rely on. Of course, the flip side of that is that the information may not be accurate if AI models are trained on a population that doesn't represent them, if it's not clinically accurate. I still think we have a long way to go in that regard, but the potential is there for folks who just have a simple question, and it could make them, so say they have a simple question about how to troubleshoot their hearing aid, then they could go to AI, and that prevents them having to drive and having to pay for an appointment. But we have to make sure that that is accurate and that they're getting the correct information. And another thing that I'm nervous about is not specific to audiology, but just in general, there are huge costs and dangers with AI related to the environmental impact. And I'm also not an expert in that regard, but I think that those issues get glossed over. I'm also an AI, I'm a ChatGPT user. I think it's hugely convenient and an amazing resource, but those things get kind of forgotten with the convenience of it all. And we have to think about that when we're looking at it as the answer to everything. I also think I agree with Crystal completely that as audiologists, we tend to be more comfortable with how we've done things and not embrace the new technologies. We saw that happening with telehealth. That's why we started Internet and Audiology, to kind of bring this more mainstream, and also with OTC hearing aids, which are my two interest areas. So I'm excited that audiologists seem to be especially the younger generation, seem to be grasping or embracing AI. But I, again, on the flip side, hope that we are ethical consumers of that tool.
That's a good point. Okay, Riley, sorry.
No
You're
need
now
to
at the
be
top of my
sorry.
screen. I was going
Keep us
down
on our
the screen
toes.
and you jumped to the top for some reason.
Well, I will say some of these things are going to sound very familiar, but I think one of the things I'm most excited about AI and how we start to integrate it into audiology in our clinical practices is finding the things that computers are better at than we are. I think so often we think about AI as this thing that's like going to replace, like there's a concern as providers that, oh no, AI is going to replace me in these things that I really love to do. But we see that people really do value human interaction. They like coming in and seeing a person for certain things, and there are other things that they would like to be able to do from home and have that convenience factor. And one of the things that I really think about with this is I was at an international summit on AI in healthcare a number of years ago, and they were talking about the fact that AI, as we would define it today, has been used since almost the 90s for diagnostic imaging because computers are really, really good at pattern recognition. And so if you're trying to detect a small tumor as fast as you can in tissues, we want to use AI for that because computer vision is better than human vision for recognizing these small patterns. And then you have a human being kind of verifying those findings. The computer just sort of acting like a highlighter sometimes for things like that. And there are some applications where we're even starting to see that being experimentally done in audiology, like using computer vision to train it on a bunch of otoscopy images to try and diagnose different middle ear pathologies. And we see some computer imaging that's 94% accurate in differentiating between different middle ear pathologies on otoscopy, which is much more accurate than I think I would be clinically at differentiating between different kinds of otitis media, for example. And I think that that's the area I'm really excited to see grow, kind of finding those ways that we can incorporate these as tools that enhance our practice. The thing that I think makes me nervous about the kind of growing interest in AI is really kind of rooted in these same things that Crystal and Laura were talking about, where I'm a little bit worried that we as a profession can tend to lag behind and be slow in adopting some of these things. And I think something that we have seen is that these technologies will be developed whether we want to be involved in that or process or not. And I would hate to see hearing healthcare be something that goes kind of through the Uberification of technology, where sort of a technology develops to disrupt an industry and the industry doesn't get involved and it winds up hurting people that are there, both as consumers and then as providers. I think there's a great way for us to kind of integrate with that. And so that's the thing that I'm excited to see with groups like this continuing to kind of push us forward as a field and call folks in about.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those things to do to these sort of concerns, I suppose, there's sort of this, and the excitement stuff is there's sort of this education. It's like people are fearful of AI, but as you point out, there are machines are much better at certain things than humans. Therefore, why shouldn't we embrace it? But people are still like, ooh. I mean, somebody I was talking to the other day says, oh, it would feel like cheating. I'm like, well, no, you're just doing it better. Why is it cheating? No, it's interesting, isn't it? Now, okay, so a couple of you alluded to some of the issues on health disparities. So should we talk a little bit about that? That, there's a fear that certain groups will get left behind. Have you got any thoughts for what we can do to either address that preemptively or think about what we should be putting in place? Because it is a tough one, isn't it?
I mean, I think the main thing is that we need to make sure that the data that's being used is data from like a broad group of people, don't we? And that we're not like, if we train all the data, I'm not an AI expert, but if we train the data on the kind of usual people who come forward for services really easily, then it won't be able to differentiate as well for groups that don't. For example, in the UK, if we don't see enough ethnic minority groups, if we're training an AI tool to diagnose middle ear conditions, it's not going to be as accurate for certain groups over others. So I think that it's really, really important that we train that data, whatever it's, I mean, that's one example I've given, but whatever it's for. And that when we are doing that piece of work, that we kind of proactively, is really difficult, but try and proactively make sure we've got a more representative group. I'm not naive to think that we're going to have a completely representative group, but we need to kind of work really hard on that piece. And I think, I think there's a lot of conversation about it in the UK, that we know that that's important, and it's just important that we do make that actually happen.
Yeah, and I mean that goes for all medical research as well, doesn't it? I mean, it's a tough one, but maybe it's more scary with AI because it's sort of in the background. You know, you have to trust what it's been trained on. It's not like you can read a clinical study and look at the ethnic groups that have taken part, etc., because you just don't know what it's trained on. So yeah, I think it's a good point. Beck?
I'd say that sort of depends on what it is and who's developed and the purpose of it. So to Riley's point, if no one in audiology steps up and develops these tools specifically for the audiology setting, then other people from other industries are going to see the gap, and they're going to see the business opportunity, and they're going to step in and develop tools for us, but without that background understanding of how diverse our populations are and what kind of diversity is required in developing the AI tools and training the model and all of those sorts of things. And so I think there's a need for us as a profession to step up and start to develop the tools that we need, because we have that insight. But I do think there's two parts to this. There's the responsibility lies on the shoulders of the developers to make sure that they have a diverse sample when they're training these models, and also to be transparent. And as you say, I think there should be a recipe on the back of the bottle that says this is how it was developed, this is who it is, and hopefully as we continue in this space, a lot of the sort of regulatory bodies in the health sectors around the world will start to see the need for that, and we'll start setting guidelines that say, yes, there needs to be a recipe on the back of the bottle. But I think there's also the responsibility lies on the clinician that is using these tools to make sure that they do have an understanding of how these tools work and what their intended purpose is. So, for example, Laura mentioned ChatGPT, which I also use ChatGPT as well as Copilot and lots of the other tools. And I think it's great, and we should be embracing and using these tools, but we also have to remember how they were developed and what they were developed for, and only use them within the parameters of what they're capable of doing. And so these tools can be great at helping us improve language and descriptors of things, but they're not search engines. And so you can't always completely trust all the information they serve up if it's on a really niche topic, just because of how it was developed and what it's meant to be used for. And so I do think there's this sort of dual responsibility. The people developing these tools need to think about these populations, but also the people using these tools need to really understand how they were developed and what the intended use is for.
Yeah, and I guess that feeds into the hype bit, that, you know, there is so much hype, and then people say, oh, yeah, this must be cool, but without really thinking too deeply about it. So, yeah.
There's also hype in the hearing aid industry, and I think that's been true for probably the last couple of years, that the newest, fanciest model of hearing aids have AI technology, but that's not really clear. It's kind of like a black box. It's not clear or described, but because AI is a fancy new buzzword, I think that's really appealing. And it may have, it's explained on a very vague level, which is probably, good enough. Not all consumers are asking for, an engineer's perspective of what's going on in their hearing aid, but it's some sort of like scene analysis and giving people customized experiences of their hearing aids, but those are available in the highest end hearing aids. So I guess my answer to this question about AI addressing health disparities is, I'm going to call back again the example of telehealth. it is initially touted as this thing that's going to solve health disparities, but then gets routed to a convenience for people with the most resources. And that's the same thing that happened with telehealth. Now it's available in hearing aids. You can communicate directly with your audiologist. Audiologists can push updates and changes to your hearing aids, but that's only available in a select models of hearing aids. And so that's not just a fear. I think that is happening with AI. So I think that it needs to be available for everyone. I also think, like back to your point, Gabby, about education, no one really knows what AI is. It's just being used as this general term, and that's not anyone's fault. It's we just need some more literacy, technology literacy around what AI is, what benefits it's giving us, and how we should use it.
And how in fact,
go ahead.
Here at Manchester, we were talking about it's probably important that we start to include training in our degree programs for how AI may affect your clinical approaches to clinical care. So in other words, it's not training students or it's not using AI for teaching, but it's teaching students about all of these issues that we're talking about, to be AI literate when you go out to practice, and what are the things to be thinking about. Riley, did you want to add anything to this bit?
Yeah, just two quick things that I think about with this. And this is sort of returning to a point that Beck brought up earlier, but this idea of kind of ensuring that we're embedded into this process to help bring kind of the richness of our clinical experiences and the experiences we've learned from our patients directly. I recently started doing kind of a community health hearing program with a local mutual aid organization. And I've been around as they've kind of touted the accomplishments of this program a couple times now. And one of the things that always strikes me as so funny is one of the kind of like the operations manager for this organization will always go, I had no idea young people got hearing loss. It's like, it's the first thing he says, because we had people in their 30s that came in and got fit with hearing aids for the first time. And that was the thing that really stuck out in his brain from this. Whereas I, as an audiologist, I'm like, oh yeah, obviously people in their 30s have, like, the people that are 0 years old have hearing loss. But I have been in this space for long enough that I had forgotten my biases when I came in about that. And I think if it's elicited, I can go through and I can do the whole, oh yeah, here is the profile in somebody's head about the general person with hearing loss. Yeah. But if I was someone who was looking for a business opportunity and trying to think about my primary consumer to that, I would probably focus on my ideas of who's the most likely person to consume a hearing loss related technology. And that's going to be older adults with age related hearing loss who are looking to buy hearing aids or looking to make their hearing aids work better. And if those are the only technologies we develop, we as providers know there's a whole constellation of people that get left out of that picture. And I think related to that, and sort of returning to a point that Crystal had brought up earlier about ensuring that the training sets for these are diverse and represent that full population. It makes me think about the first time I went to teach an introduction to audiology class. I was trying really hard to make sure I was using diverse sample patients. And I was sort of constructing these case studies, and I ran into a big problem where just trying to find images of people with darker skin for their ear canals was incredibly challenging. And this was for something where it was to show future clinicians. So it wasn't trivial that they see these images, but it wasn't for something like a direct data set that I was training on this. But I just cited, right, this, computers are really good at recognizing middle ear imaging, but I have a feeling that was primarily trained on white people. And so how that model performs, we've seen in other fields, is not as good when we kind of leave that typical training set. And this is a problem, again, that I think a lot of us in the field know about, but something that I don't think I've seen funding agencies start to get more interested in AI as a new and shiny thing, but I don't think I've seen any calls, for example, doing something that's really simple, like building training data sets, like building robust corpuses of data that AI could be trained on would be something that would be incredibly valuable for a funding agency to put money towards. And then that's a publicly available data set that future models can be trained on, that can be kind of integrated into best. I've seen institutes like the NIH kind of try to gather up these other training sets that exist in other places. But again, those have these biases baked in that we know exist. And there haven't been efforts that I've seen that I think would be kind of low-hanging fruit that if somebody was willing to put a little bit of money towards could make a really big difference.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I want to sort of, in a way, direct this at you, Crystal, to begin, because you are very much in contact with the patients in your role. And how is trust or a lack of trust impacting in your experience, it's sort of uptake of AI tools? And what is your understanding of what the layperson understands of all of this?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say that when we are talking to people who are deaf and have hearing loss, there's kind of a decent proportion of people that really are interested in how digital technologies, including AI, can play a role in delivering a service that is designed in a different way to what they expect. And I think it's often so say, for example, if you have kind of about a third of patients that want to see something different, which is not just all about AI, it's kind of, about kind of digital in general, but AI is kind of wrapped up in there. It's very easy to say, well, we shouldn't design for that because, the other 70% want the same thing. Whereas I think that amount of people is growing that do trust it. And as I alluded to earlier on, I think what's coming through is that the trust is more at the moment, when it comes specifically to AI, is more around kind of long-term treatment and kind of long-term support, but also kind of being given your treatment, and actually less around diagnosis. And that makes sense for audiology, because there's a kind of lot of work to be done around kind of diagnosis and AI still. And I think, kind of thinking about kind of how can we improve trust, I think it's got to start with clinicians first, haven't it? There's lots of research that needs to be done ourselves first. For us, I'm really excited about AI, but I don't fully trust it myself yet around what it can do in different places. Like, I want to see more data, even on, the conversation we've just had around health inequalities. So I think it's got to start, first of all, with academics and clinicians being really trusting, first of all, of what AI can do in different circumstances. And then in each situation where we trust it, then kind of explaining to people who are deaf and have hearing loss why they can trust something being used in that way. I guess so RNID just held an event very recently with NHS England in London, which it was very fortunate to have Gabby there as well. And one of the ideas that came up from that event, and we had several different workshops happening, so it might well have been your idea, Gabby. I'm not sure whose idea it was, but somebody came up with the idea there around kind of the way we can kind of really build trust is by starting off with those kind of really low risk tasks, first of all. So building trust within clinicians around kind of low risk tasks. And the more that they trust kind of the use of AI, that confidence will really fill when they're then talking to their patients, I think. So I think, kind of in summary, people with deaf and have hearing loss are telling us that they want to see the use of common technology that they see around them, including AI, kind of in their services, but they have less trust in diagnosis. But that's not to say that they don't want to see diagnosis. And I think you've been doing some work in this area as well, haven't you, Gabby? So yeah, I think it's just a slow nudge in terms of increasing trust, but also let's make sure we've got the data so that we trust it too.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one thing that we have to also remember, I'm thinking about your data set of 70% of people want the same. Maybe we also need to be talking to the people who haven't had anything yet, because people do like the same. And I think we kind of get a skewed result, because it worked for me. Why do I want to change it? And if we talk to people who are naive to all of this, they may actually be a lot more open. So on that note, I don't know if Riley, if you've had experience with this, because there's this level of trust. I have a PhD student who is going to collect data about how parents feel about AI being used, say, for some of the otoscopy, etc., on their infants and children. Have you thought about that? Because that is kind of another layer yet. It's like, do I trust this technology with my baby?
That's interesting. I feel like I've seen some AI kind of opinions about AI work in audiology. Kamal Agrawal did a really good study over in India of kind of providers, especially in educational contexts, on their thoughts about it in the field, but that was a provider perspective. And I know there's been some other fields that have done kind of patient specific work, but I'm not aware of anything, especially nothing audiology specific, about parents of children that AI is being used on, especially in things like diagnosis. So I'd be very curious to see what that PhD student finds.
Yeah, he hasn't. Yeah, he's messing around with ethics at this point, but it will be interesting. Beck.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about your comment earlier, ask the people who have not had experience with the health process yet with their interest in AI. And it just reminded me of some work by Kathy Sucher and Rob Eichelboom over at the Ear Science Institute, specifically with telehealth though. So they surveyed a whole lot of adult cochlear implant adults and adults with cochlear implants who are accessing their services and asked them their views on telehealth services. And initially, a lot of them said, no, not interested. I like what I'm currently doing. Why change it? I prefer face-to-face. This was just before COVID. And so then during the COVID times, everyone was forced to go telehealth online. And so then afterwards, they surveyed all these people again, and a huge proportion of them said, oh, I actually much prefer the telehealth now. It's so convenient. I'm going to stick with telehealth now that I know now that I know both, it is my preference. And so, I mean, trust is built through transparency and accountability and relevance. And so I'm not saying we shouldn't hide the fact that we're using AI from people. But I think as time goes on and they are in some ways forced to experience the AI version of things, as long as it's in a kind of a safe and effective way, I do think we'll see less of this sort of resistance and concern. And at some point in the very near future, it's just going to be the way we do it. And it will be accepted because it just will be standard practice. It's just getting through that phase. It's going to be tricky.
Yeah, and we've got some data. So we put out a survey of people. It was sort of, how would people feel about doing a home test, and if they're willing to do a home test, and again that would be some kind of app, how would they feel about getting a hearing aid sent to them by the NHS? So in other words, we're not suggesting a private thing, by the NHS that was either programmed for them or that they programmed for themselves versus a standard care audiologist. And the people who had already got hearing aids were much more in favor of standard care than the people who didn't have hearing aids. They were much more open to, well, sure, send it to me. So I think that's what they know. That's why I've been thinking about this. It's like, yeah, we have to be careful whose opinions we listen. I mean, that sounds very bad, but we need to also remember there are people out there who haven't any experience, and they will have different opinions, and we just need to remember them and not just go to the people who've already been in the system. And
I mean, I think it's an excellent point, Gabby, because in the UK we know that there's a couple of million people who are using hearing aids regularly, but possibly like another up to 6 million people who could really benefit from them and don't have them. And so we need to make sure we're designing a system that attracts all those people in with kind of high levels of unmet need as much as we are for people that want the same. And I think, just not to misrepresent my kind of numbers, I think that 70% of people weren't kind of against kind of, use of AI and kind of wider digital tools. I think they were just kind of less interested in them. And I think the key thing that's come out from us talking to people is just about choice, about different people wanting different things. And I think it not even being that one person wants one thing and another person wants something else. But I think even within one individual, you can want different things at different times, can't you? At different points in the pathway, but also depending on what you've got going on in your life and how robust or vulnerable you're feeling in terms of kind of how much you trust digital tools. I mean, my phone's been broken the last couple of days. And so I probably have kind of less trust in technology for a couple of days, but different things happen to you, and so we just need to make sure that kind of trust is built in, and choice as well.
Gabby, on this topic, can I pose a question to the panel? Here in Australia, a lot of GPs, I would say almost a vast majority of GPs are now using AI note takers in their appointments. And about 6 months ago, when this first started to happen, I had a couple of friends say, "Oh, I noticed it," and my GP asked me for my permission, and I said, "I don't know, I don't mind, of course, whatever." And I went to the GP the other day, and I could see they were using an AI note taker, but they didn't ask for my permission. They didn't let me know. It was just, it's now part of their standard practice. And so I'm wondering, but I hear a lot of hesitation for audiologists to adopt AI note takers because of their concerns around whether the client wants it and the privacy and all those sorts of things. And so I'd like to ask the panel their thoughts on how do we know what elements need that full transparency and what elements perhaps don't need that full transparency, and that we just adopt and move on with, and it becomes standard practice as soon as we adopt it. Like, we didn't ask clients if they were comfortable with moving to digital hearing aids from analog. We just did it because we knew it was better and safe. And so how do we know?
I'm just smiling because there were many veterans in the VA when I first started working there who insisted they had their old analog hearing aids because they trusted them. But yes, it's a very good point. So who wants to answer that?
So this actually, I was hoping to jump in because you had kind of mentioned earlier this idea of how to tell people about AI and how not to. And I was trying to do some rapid Googling to see if I could remember that summit that I was talking about for AI in healthcare. There was a VA-sponsored study of a bunch of veterans that was asking them this exact question, kind of like, do you trust AI being used in your healthcare? And does it matter which context it's being used in? I want to say it was administered by someone at Brown University, but I've had some sleep since then. And something that was really interesting that they found was people's acceptance of AI didn't scale as much. And generally speaking, like, the less invasive something was, the more okay people were with AI being used. And there were some other things that way, but there weren't any particularly big effects that way that the study team had expected to make big differences. The thing that made the biggest difference in people's acceptance of AI was when it was explained why AI was being used. So, for example, imaging. Folks were resistant to the idea of an AI model interpreting imaging that had this really big consequence of whether or not they had cancer, right? But when you explained, oh, we're using AI because it's actually better at this than your pathologist would be without it, the acceptance of that practice went up dramatically. And so I do wonder if there are ways. It's harder with something like an AI note taker because the reason is we're trying to make your provider not quit because of the paperwork burdens of providing you with healthcare. So maybe that's a little bit different. We need to talk about it in a different way. But that's something that I really took away from that, of the idea of being able to explain to someone why this is a good tool for us to be using goes a long way in helping folks feel comfortable with its use in.
Yeah, I mean, but it doesn't seem a very difficult argument that I can listen to you rather than sit and take notes, and it will remember everything and summarize it for me. I mean, it seems like it's a very simple explanation. Laura, do you want to?
Sorry, maybe the barrier is that clinicians feel insecure or not prepared to have that conversation with their patients, which I would completely understand. But physicians have been using maybe not AI specifically, but they've been using tools like UpToDate and websites like that forever. for as long as they've been around and not telling us about it. So, and I'm okay with it. I feel like I've been getting good care. I don't necessarily need to be told about every single thing. And I don't know, I think that's definitely an important conversation to have regarding the ethics of what is being used in the office, because it's a conversation around patient privacy and, if that needs to be disclosed and patients need to sign something ahead of time. But my gut feeling is that it may be, rather than the clinician doesn't want to use it, maybe they feel like the patient may be not comfortable with it, and then the patient, it's like a fear of losing business, maybe. So I would be interested to see if that varies based on setting, like if it's more private practice, or if someone who works in a hospital would also feel nervous about it. I also wanted to mention one of my favorite studies that I've ever read is by Elizabeth Krupinski, she's a telehealth researcher, but she's in radiology. And it was a study where it's about pattern recognition in radiology, and they trained pigeons to detect cancer in x-rays. And the pigeons did just as good, if not better, than humans. So that probably would not engender a lot of confidence in patients, telling them that a pigeon had identified their cancer, but they're really good at pattern recognition.
Would you rather I use this AI tool or a pigeon?
Human or a pigeon?
Oh, funny. Crystal, what were you going to say just now?
I guess, I was interested in, as everyone else, generally about kind of how people involved in decisions. And I guess I'm really interested in what wider research there is out there around, kind of generally, not even in audiology, how do people want to be involved in AI decisions? But I wanted to pick up on your specific conversation about AI note taker, because I think here in the UK, there's going to be a lot more use of note taking as well across the NHS. Well, that's what I'm hearing. But I think that for people who are deaf and have hearing loss, it's got a really specific use, isn't it? Because actually it's a real shame if it's something that's hidden behind the scenes, for the physician to be able to write a letter afterwards, because actually it might benefit somebody during the appointment if there was high quality live note taking that could be used as kind of some kind of captions instead. Or is there something that can be used as kind of live captions that can also then generate the note taking at the end? So I think we always need to think about things like that from a dual usage, and for our communities, it's about access to health as well, and people being able to actually access the appointment, whether that's audiology or wider health appointments as well. So it's just something else to think about.
I think you're, yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, on that same point, one of my colleagues who saw a GP recently, and an AI note taker was used. At the end of the appointment, the GP printed out immediately, or like during the final part of the appointment, printed out a summary of the conversation, and gave it to them and said, "Does this capture what you came in for, what you were looking for, and does this capture the conversation we've just had?" And so it allowed the patient to provide that clarity, which I think would be fantastic for people with hearing difficulties, to make sure that they've heard and understood what the health professional has told them, and had the opportunity to fully share what they're wanting to tell the health professional. But also it's this sort of element of accountability, because sometimes if the health professional misunderstands the need or the desire of the conversation, the case notes are actually the health professional's lens of what occurred, and not necessarily as accurate as an AI note taker who is neutral and doesn't have any preference for what's documented and not documented in case notes. So I actually see AI note takers as being very patient focused and supportive of the patient's perspective, and actually leveling that playing field, so to speak, of what's noted and not noted in case notes.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, is there any reason why a patient couldn't actually take it home with them as a reminder of the whole interaction? I mean, it seems like it's absolutely
that was
fantastic.
What they did. They printed it and gave it to them to take home, so they had a copy. Yeah.
So then, I think that's excellent. I forget what I was going to say just before you said that, so let's not. I'm sure it doesn't matter. I see time is moving on. I know I had one question that I wanted to end with. Let me see what it was. because I think we've addressed most of the things we want to talk about. So what role do audiologists have in shaping the future of AI in clinical care? And some of you have alluded to it along the way, but I was thinking it might be nice to end with that as a sort of a big picture sort of question. Laura, you were nodding. Do you want to?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it in my intro, because in academia, I think we have a role to talk about it with our students. When this first became kind of evident on a wider scale, more popular in the public, academia was really scared of it, and we told our students, don't use it. And then we started using it, so we can't be hypocritical. And so I think where we're at now is talking to our students about how to use it to their best advantage. I'm not quite sure how to do that. I'm still kind of learning where to reach a middle ground with students, because I didn't use AI or language learning models when I was being trained. And so I still kind of think that students need to not use it as much, because they need to kind of learn how to write a report on their own without it. But then on the other hand, it's so helpful to be able to use it. So I'm kind of between two sides, torn between two feelings there. But I think that it's up to us as educators and as clinicians to educate ourselves, and then to pass that knowledge on to the best that we can to our students, both student clinicians and grad students, undergrads, and also to our patients, to communicate as transparently as possible. And then to keep in mind that this is a tool that we would like to use and make available as equitably as possible, so we don't get in the position of it being used by just the top 5% of people with the most resources.
Yeah, I think about that resources, right? I mean, I guess there are the resources of the patients who have access, but there are also the resources of the clinicians who can provide it as part of their service, who've got access to even just basic knowledge. So yeah.
Laura,
yeah.
I'm really interested in that concept of how we teach with AI, but also how we make sure that people are learning the elements they need to learn and not relying on AI to submit the assignment, sort of thing. Because if I think back to before mobile phones, we had to remember everyone's phone numbers. And so I had in my mind, my mum and my dad and my sister and my 5 best friends' phone. I had all these phone numbers in my head. Now that I have a mobile phone that has all those phone numbers, I don't know anyone's phone number. I have to actually stop and think to remember my own phone number to recite it, because you never type in a phone number anymore. But I'm sure that part of my brain isn't sitting there empty. Those resources that used to remember phone numbers are now remembering something else. But I have lost that skill to remember multiple phone numbers. And so I wonder how we do make sure that the next generation of clinicians still have a deep understanding of how hearing aid features work and how to generate write a report or write a paper or whatever those skills are that we used to do without having AI that can quickly tell us the answers, but in a way that equips them to then work in a clinical environment that does have AI tools that make it efficient, but that they still have that understanding, sort of knowledge in the background to help guide. So, for example, if you ask ChatGPT to write you an article on a particular topic for an industry journal, it will write an article, but it won't have a strong argument. It won't have a clear thread. It won't have kind of build the rationale and then describe and then really relate it. And it won't be your own voice and your own thinking. Whereas if you draft it yourself and then use these models to help tweak the language, it'll be a much better paper doing it in partnership with an AI tool. But I'm just thinking, how do we make sure our students aren't losing that opportunity to develop those skills first and apply AI? I don't work in a university, so I'm really interested to know how our university is kind of approaching this problem.
Yeah, I think this could be an hours long conversation and we don't have the
Okay.
answer yet. We're just barely breaching that topic. My university is doing a really good job about having open conversations about it. We have,
Yeah.
it seems like, weekly talks and lectures, and they're bringing in experts, but it feels like it's drinking from a fire hose. Like, this is coming at us really
Yeah.
quickly, and we're um, already behind. It's hard to keep up, but it's a really important conversation to have. I think that I'm okay with not knowing people's phone numbers. It's probably the same conversation people had when calculators come out and we're not doing things by hand anymore.
Okay.
I'm okay with that. I love calculators, but um, I don't feel as comfortable with students not being able to write and having that. This is like an instant gratification generation, and if they just type a prompt in and get a paper and then submit that, they're not developing those core skills of writing and of learning critical thinking that's what grad school is for. And so we're still figuring it out. But I think that I'm hoping that that can happen in collaboration and that we're not all doing it alone.
Yeah, well, the same questions are, of course, arising at the University of Manchester as well. And yeah, and there are some people who are much more embracing of it and accepting. I mean, it's sort of like we have a lot of international students who struggle with English and they may have a full understanding. And so to do things, as you're saying, Beck, where they've shown they've got an understanding of it, but they can improve it. That's great, right? But they need to have that understanding. And yeah, how we navigate is tough, very tough. So
if I could add on to that just really quickly,
yeah.
I view there being an interesting role actually in the opposite direction. I really like some assignments I've seen students do where they've had ChatGPT or whatever large language model they want to take the first pass at it. And then their task is to do exactly what you were talking about. Find all of the ways that it failed to do this in the way we'd like to. Why this discussion section uses a lot of very flowery adjectives, but doesn't actually say anything substantive.
Yeah.
And doing that in a classroom is something I really like because it has them first go through and essentially switch from the role of like generator of the first draft to editor, right? Like, how do I go through and evaluate this critically instead of how do I get words onto the page and then hopefully evaluate my own work? And we all have our blind spots and for that. But instead, by kind of having the computer, it reminds me a little bit of the idea of like just get words on the page because you can't edit a blank page. It takes that step out and has them jump straight to that critical evaluation step of, okay, being able to write sentences is something that I hope you can do. But if you can't, now great news, there's ChatGPT for that. Can you critically evaluate this information in the way that you would critically evaluate another article or a white paper you got from industry? Are you using some of these other skills that actually are super important to your job in the future, and use those skills to kind of integrate AI so that maybe your limited time as a graduate student where you have to write a bunch of these papers is spent more on some of the crunchier parts of it. But it's done in this safe environment. So if you're bad at doing that, I, as an instructor, can then go in and say, like, hey, here are some things that I noticed about this paper that you kind of left untouched. And I think these are some missing elements. Why don't you go back and take another pass now at this? And so I really love the idea of doing that inside this learning environment, because otherwise, you become a busy provider and then you decide to take some shortcuts is a very unfair way, but you try and find these time-saving measures and kind of miss out on some things. But the other thing that I do really like about kind of these language models as generators for some of these big texts is they're sort of trained on large samples of how people actually talk. And I think that can actually be good for us, especially as academics or folks with really high educational attainment, to look at how a computer model breaks down an idea and uses more common words to describe things. So I think there are also some times where I've used some of these language models and gone, oh, I would never have said it that way. I would have said it in this different way. But it's interesting to see how this is broken down and how using a more common lexicon, we might have come to this same point. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. But, so those are just some things that I think about kind of on the edges, where I think there's multiple ways you can construct things like this. And I think you get different things out of different ways of doing.
Yeah, we were talking about generating a bad essay from using ChatGPT to teach students kind of exactly what you're saying, and to show them that it's sort of transparent when they've done this, and how they, what is wrong. Because yeah, we were talking about exactly the same. I think that's brilliant. You've actually done that.
If I can come in on kind of what I think the role of audiologists are, I think it's coming back to what I said at the beginning around kind of my kind of fear just being that audiology doesn't actually move fast enough. And so I think what we need to do is kind of make sure that the opportunity to use new and emerging AI technology is kind of baked into local innovation work that's happening. So we're like constantly looking at kind of how can I improve my service, you know, what kind of new tools exist, both in kind of terms of kind of small administrative things, medium-sized things to do with treatment plans, but also bigger pieces. So for example, in the UK, we're starting to think, as I'm sure people are in other countries, about British Sign Language and AI and how that can be developed. And of course, there aren't huge amounts of sign language users that go into audiology departments, but there are some. And as that technology emerges, how can we use and trust it and use it in our services, as well as everything that we've talked about that comes in between. So I think we need to kind of bake in those conversations really into day-to-day, automatically how we're thinking about improving services, but also just really putting the patients at the center of what we're doing. So making sure we're just talking constantly to people who deaf and have hearing loss about what they want to see. And I guess we're having this conversation together for this particular event, but making sure we have these conversations, you know, whether that's through research or through local discussions with people who are deaf and have hearing loss. But it's moving so fast, isn't it, that we're really going to have to kind of keep up those conversations. And then I think it's also just about audiologists learning from each other and sharing as well. So even within the UK, you kind of have like small local things that are happening, but then to try and roll them out nationally can be tricky. But then also, obviously, we're all talking at kind of a global level here, and there's exciting things happening everywhere. And how do we keep up these really excellent conversations? So we're sharing, you know, what people have tried and what's worked and what hasn't, and turn it into an exciting conversation. Just much, you know, I feel a lot of energy here today. How do we kind of have those exciting conversations within audiology as well?
Thank you. Has anyone got anything else to add?
Just very briefly, I promise, because I know we're towards time. But fine. Building off that idea that Crystal was talking about of kind of building these partnerships and going out and doing things, we did a review a couple of years ago of a bunch of these models specifically designed for kind of predicting hearing loss from cancer treatment. And one of the things that really stood out to us was, by the end, I could tell you what person was the lead author on a paper based on which elements they had decided to include in their predictive model. And which creates this really big problem, because it makes it really hard to evaluate these models against one another, because we're not using the same tools when we go through. So there were genetics groups that had basically, they only put genetics, genes into the model and attempted to predict hearing at the end. Whereas audiologists wanted to include basically every auditory measure that we had come up with. The oncology folks had a different set of things they had done. And all of us were trying to work towards the same goal, but none of us were working with each other. And so we all came to slightly different conclusions about what mattered. And frankly, none of the audiology models could evaluate whether the geneticists were right about what the most important predictors of hearing loss were, and vice versa. And so one of the big calls to action we put into that paper was sort of start working with one another. Like, let's get together a big group of geneticists and oncologists and ENTs and audiologists and these other, and computer scientists, frankly, as we start looking at better and better ways that computers can make these determinations, and get us all in the same room so we can agree on which of these factors matter, which of these factors should be in these models, and then see what those outputs look like and try and create more unified data sets. But then one of the advantages of that is it gets us into the rooms with people who are developing these technologies and doing these things, so that we're not all kind of independently coming up with 5 different versions of the same technology.
Yeah, very, very true. Beck, do you want to say anything? You've got a big smile on your face.
Oh, no, I guess, yeah, closing thoughts on the role of the audiologist would be to stay current and see what's out there. In most kind of implementation or behaviour change research, the number one barrier that comes up for audiologists adopting some new thing, no matter what it is always time. But I feel as though everyone has the same 24 hours in their day. It's just about what you prioritize and what you use your time for. And so if you focus on the daily grind, then you will continue just doing the daily grind. But if you carve out time to look to the future and look at what else is out there and look at what you can adopt to improve your daily grind, then that's what you're going to achieve. You're going to find things that will help you improve your daily grind. And so, you know, I mean, lots of people have said it before, but I don't think audiologists are going to lose their job to AI, but they may lose their job to another audiologist who is using AI, because they're going to be far more effective, efficient, and probably have a high quality of service delivery as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect place on which to stop. We've certainly used up our hour. Thank you all so much for joining us. And as I said, I know it's rather late, Crystal, for you, very early for you, Beck. So thank you. But that doesn't mean we're not any more grateful to Laura and Riley as well. So thank you all. And I hope that everybody enjoys listening to this. So thank you. Should we stop recording?
Thank you.